Good morning. It's Tuesday, May 12th. We're back again today, continuing on in the Sun, Earth, Moon system. Yesterday we looked at the characteristics of the Earth, the fact that it's a sphere, that it has a magnetic field, and how its orbit around the Sun um, create things like solstices, the first day of summer and the first day of winter, and the equinoxes, which are the first day of spring and fall. Today, we're going to look a little bit more closely at the moon and some things that the Earth, Moon, and Sun, when they arrange in certain ways, show us what we can see in the sky. All right, so we're going to start with just some basic information about the moon. And this may or may not be in the chapter, so I'm just going to throw this out here. The moon is actually about 400 times smaller than the sun, but the moon is about 400 times closer to us than the sun. So when we look up in the sky at the moon and the sun, they appear to be approximately the same size. It's no different than your thumb being quite a bit smaller than your head, but based on how close it is to your eye, we can make it appear to be the same size as my head. Pretty funky. Give it a try. Find your dog or cat or brother or sister. Hold your thumb up there, and you can make your thumb be just as big as their head or their whole body or your whole house. It all depends on how close it is. All right. So the moon is pretty darn small, um, but it does cover up the sun at different times. That's going to be tomorrow's stuff. All right. But for today, we're going to start with the moon, and it takes 27.3 days to make a lap around the Earth. One orbit around the Earth, 27.3 days. However, keep in mind that the Earth is moving around the sun during those 27.3 days. So it actually takes a total of 29.5 days to go from full moon to full moon, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. All right. Another neat thing about the moon, and this is true about most moons, and that is the same side of the moon always faces the Earth. So if we look up at this picture, um, the moon is rotating, and it takes 27.3 days to spin around once. It also takes 27.3 days to go around the Earth, which means that the same side is always pointing towards the Earth. So anytime you look up with a telescope or a pair of binoculars at the moon, it's the same side of it that's always facing us, which is kind of cool. All right. Um, the moon itself does not create any light. The reason that it appears to be bright in the sky is because it's reflecting the sun's light. All right. How much of the moon do you think is lit up by the sun at all times? Well, if you said 50% or about half of the moon, you are right. Half of the moon is always facing the sun, just like the Earth does, right? And half of the moon is always facing away from the sun, and that's in darkness, right? So you might wonder, well, why is it then that we don't always see a full moon, or we see different shapes of the moon in the sky at different times? And it has to do with the orientation of where exactly the moon is around the Earth in relationship to the sun. All right. And these we call the phases of the moon phases. All right. And I'm going to skirt down here a little bit and show these pictures on the screen. These are the major moon phases that we talk about. All right. And what you have to remember is that half of the moon is always lit. So you can see I kind of shaded out the part pointing away from the sun. This part is always dark. So it's all about where we're at on Earth, looking up at the moon, and how much of that lit part of the moon can we actually see. For instance, if the moon is on the opposite side of the sun from us, we can see the entire lit half of the moon. And to us, that would be the full moon. We look up from Earth, hey, we can see the whole side is lit. Now on this side, if the moon is between the Earth and the sun, we look up and all we can see is the unlit half. So really, we see nothing. And that we call the new moon. Doesn't mean that the moon isn't there, because of course it is. We just can't see any of the lit half. All right. Another major one that we would notice might be up here. Here we look from Earth and we can see it looks like the left half of the moon is lit up. And when we look on the sheet right here, we can see that would be the third quarter when we look up and see the left half of the moon being lit. When the moon is on this side, the opposite side, which I did not draw these very well, but we would look at the moon and now we could see the right half is lit up. And so that would be this picture, which is the first quarter. We call those the moon phases. And we have waxing phases and waning phases. Waxing, if you've ever waxed anything, what you're actually doing is you're adding material to something. If you're going to wax a car, you're going to take the wax and you're going to put it on a rag and you're going to add the wax to the car. That's how I try to remember the waxing phases. In the waxing phases, we're adding light to the moon. We're adding part of the moon that we can see. So the moon phases always start with a new moon where you can't see anything. We look up and all we see is the dark half. All right, that's the new moon. From there, as the moon makes its orbit around the Earth, next we can see a sliver of lit portion on the right side. A few days later, now we can see the full right half of the moon as we look up there, and that would be the first quarter. As it continues on, a few days later, we can see a waxing gibbous, which means we can see the right half plus some. And then on the opposite side of the new moon, so this is maybe 13 or 14 days later, we can see the new moon. We can see the full moon. Now we look up, we can see the entire lit half, and we call that a full moon. As it continues its orbit, now you can see the light starts to disappear. These are the waning phases. The amount of lit moon is waning. And it, just like the light begins on the right side in the waxing phases, the light starts to go away on the right side. Now we can see all of the left plus some of the right here. As it continues on, now we can see just the left half of the moon. Then we can see a sliver just on the left side. And 29.5 days later, we get back to the new moon where we can't see anything because we are looking at the unlit side. All right. Those are the main phases of the moon. Your quiz today is going to be showing you these pictures and asking you to identify which phase is which. All right. So hopefully you're going to pay attention. You're going to look at the pictures and you're going to be able to determine which phase of the moon we're looking at. The waxing phases, we add light. In the waning phases, the lit portion starts to become less and less until we see absolutely nothing up in the sky. All right. Very short lesson today. A little about the characteristics of the moon, about its size, and that it faces the same side towards the Earth all the time, and how it interacts with the orbit of the Earth and the Sun to show us these different moon phases. All right. One last thing that I'm going to throw in here. It takes 29.5 days to go from, let's say, a full moon all the way till we see another full moon. So how often is it that we would have 2 full moons in the same month? Well, February doesn't even have 29.5 days, so it can never happen in February. Some months have 30 days and some have 31 days. So the only way that we would see 2 full moons in the same month is if we saw one at the very, very beginning of the month on the 1st. All right. That's why a second full moon in the same month, which is pretty rare, is called a blue moon. It's not really blue, but you've all heard the phrase, once in a blue moon or something like that, right? Usually old people like me would say that. Um, that's the definition of a blue moon, a second full moon within every month. It happens, fairly regularly. It's not like it's a million years in between. I don't know exactly how often it happens, but it does happen relatively frequently. All right, so you got the moon phases. You got what a blue moon is. You got the orbit of the moon, how long it takes, those kinds of things. There will be a short quiz that goes along with this. Do your best. Email me, message me, ask for a Google meeting, and I'd be happy to help you. All right. So, with that said, that's the lesson for today. Tomorrow, we're going to finish up the week talking about lunar eclipses and solar eclipses. So, until then, I hope you have a great day. And if you need me, make sure you reach out. I'm here to help. Talk to you later.